This edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose is sponsored by HashiCorp Federal and Carasoft. Today, the Defense Department's Thunderdome hits the gas pedal, the cloud conundrum for the Pentagon, and the Air Force makes a big investment in Zero Trust. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Defense Information Systems Agency says its big cybersecurity project is ready for prime time. The director of DISA, Lieutenant General Robert Skinner, says his agency will scale Thunderdome after a successful prototyping phase. At AFCEA's TechNet Cyber this week, I asked General Skinner for an overview of Thunderdome.
So Thunderdome in and of itself is our Zero Trust instantiation and our Zero Trust framework of what DISA is going to provide, not only to DISA, but to the entire department as they'd like. Mm-hmm. So what we've done is we've kind of broken up into I'll say, three different areas. One is kind of SD-WAN, SASE, and CHES are kind of the three key areas of where our network infrastructure will be laid out. We had a prototype that we just finished, met all of the requirements, and so we are working now with the department to go into full-fledged production. Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing that I want to make sure we highlight is it's not just a prototype. When I talk Thunderdome, it is everything that we're talking about from a DISA offering for Zero Trust, mm-hmm. Which is kind of I'll say it's the buzzword, but it's where everyone's trying to go. It's the journey that everyone's on, mm-hmm. is to improve our cyber posture and our cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. And so we also add on to that Comply to Connect, identity management, which if you saw the keynote, Gabe Solomon, who is our 20-year-old leading the effort when it comes to global directory, mm-hmm. and our identity management, he's in charge of that. And so we package all those together. And if you look at the DoD strategy for Zero Trust, they have like 153 different key activities that they want you to meet, and we're at about 131 of those, mm-hmm. in our overall offering. So it's a great capability that will soon be a theater near you.
What's the intersection between the efforts that you are undertaking on Thunderdome already and the Zero Trust strategy that CIO Sherman rolled out earlier this year?
It's actually, it comes together real well, because the strategy is kind of just documenting a lot of things that we've already been doing and that we've been working towards. Mm-hmm. And so it just kind of puts a bow around everything that the department wants us to achieve by 2027 and then further on as we continue that journey.
So I read Thunderdome proved with real users the solution works. DISA onboarded approximately 1,500 test users at 3 locations. What were you trying to learn there that enabled you to say, yes, this works, and we want to take it, we want to scale it?
We were really looking for, does the technology work together? And so working with our integrator, bringing all this together at 3 different locations, because you don't just want one, and about 1,500 is what we thought would be the kind of the low point of, if this works, mm-hmm. this is what we need, this will show it. Mm-hmm. And then we just kind of build from there.
Yeah, what did you learn from that test or prototype that enabled you to say, we like this, we want to do this full scale?
Actually, the performance.
Just that, yeah.
And when we compared the performance of what we have today from whether you're on-prem in an office location or even at home, mm-hmm. people actually had better performance leveraging this technology and these capabilities, mm-hmm. as well as better cybersecurity. And so one of our LOEs is how do we harmonize cybersecurity and user experience. Mm-hmm. This actually brought both of those together and much better than what we are today.
Yeah, I was going to be my next question. What kind of feedback you got from the people that you used the prototype with to determine how transparent it was to the end user, how they felt using it?
Much better performance.
Yeah.
What was the bottom line? And they're able to go access the applications that they need to. We use both performance metrics, but also from a user experience, mm-hmm. we ask them, hey, how was your experience? How was it compared to what it was before we put you in the prototype? And almost every single one of them said, much better performance, much better user experience. And then when we looked at our network administrators, the security was even better.
Mm-hmm. How is it built to flex so that as requirements change, as the threat landscape changes, as applications change, you don't have to go back and retool it every time?
It's module-based.
Yeah.
And so we have different technologies that we're bringing together, and it's modules and it's scalable. Mm-hmm. So we can start depending on which locations, depending on which theaters, depending on the number of people, all that can play in the calculus of how much technology you need at a particular place. Mm-hmm. And if say you have a mission that comes to a particular location, then you can actually expand that with either the existing technology or you can add to it. Because a lot of it's cloud-based, and so it's kind of on-demand capabilities.
I want to shift gears for a minute. I saw you at AFCEA DC's DISA lunch not too long ago, and you talked about 3 Ps there as far as interacting with industry. Walk me through those 3 Ps, because I think it was a pretty succinct, concise way to talk about how you want to interact with the vendor base.
And the 3 Ps are posture, position, and partnerships. And posture is really taking a look at ourselves and go, where do we stand in relation to our cyber posture? That includes technology, that includes our processes, that includes our people. And then the position is, now how do we position those pieces? It's almost like a chessboard. And how do you position those pieces in order to get the most effective bang for the buck? So posture is kind of where you sit today. The positioning is, where do we want to go to and how do we want to move those? And then we cannot do anything without partnerships. And this is partnerships within the department. It's partnerships with industry. It's partnerships with our allies and partners. If you think about today, and people see on Signal Magazine, the relationship between a DoD CIO and U.S. Cyber Command, it is the best that it's been in my 38-year career. Because Joe Nakasone and Honorable Sherman are just that tight. And we actually have a 0700 meeting every Monday morning where we all sit down together. They make sure that they're on the same page, and then we follow that direction. And so it's those partnerships that really make it well what it is.
So for posture, you've kind of described where you want to go with Thunderdome, and particularly in Zero Trust. What else is encompassed in that posture piece?
Actually, part of it is the people. And our Workforce 2025 is our kind of effort to really get after how do we refactor our workforce to make sure they have the right education, the right understanding, the right training, and the right skill sets to get after the future threat. And so when we bring that together, starting from how do we hire, how do we retain, and then how do we professionally develop, that's what our Workforce 2025 is, and that force is part of the calculus when we look at how we posture, and also how do we position our force.
Well, and that's where I wanted to go next, because that's important to that positioning, I imagine, to move those pieces of the board where you want them to be. People have to have the capabilities to make those moves.
Yes,
Use that chess.
They have to know what their capabilities are, and then as leaders, we have to know and understand what their capabilities are so we can move them in the right place. And we know what the gaps and shortfalls are, because not every single individual knows every single thing, and we understand that. So we got to make sure that we understand what their expertise is and that we can fully leverage, because at the end of the day, we want to empower our workforce and that innovative spirit that they have each and every day. How do we unleash that? Because that, to me, at the end of the day, it's not the technology that's going to make us successful, it's the people. And the people who understand how technology can solve our complex problems, those are the national treasures.
As you undertook the Workforce 2025 work to bring it together, and you assessed where your workforce was, what did you not have or not have enough of that you want to have at some future point?
I'd say that the foundational thing that we want more of is critical thinkers. Now, how you make a critical thinker and how you make them better, we're still working through that. But at the end of the day, it is such a complex environment out there today that we need critical thinkers to solve those complex problems. The other aspect I'd say is data. And how do we better leverage data? And so whether it's data scientists, being able to leverage them so we understand how to look at the data. We're collecting so much data in our enterprise. We have sensors in a whole bunch of different places. And now how do we take that and be able to look at that data and find out that needle in the haystack of where there's a potential adversary or where there's a potential vulnerability that we need to shore up. Or there may be a misconfiguration to where we need to improve that to improve the user performance.
We have about a minute left. I want to talk about partnerships. What makes a good partner for DISA?
Trust. First and foremost, it's got to be trust. We have to be able to trust you, and you have to be able to trust us that we know what we're doing and that we are going to deliver. That's first and foremost. And then presence matters. Being together, being in the fight, whether it's a good fight or it's a not so good fight, being there together. So I think presence, and it can be virtual, but being present there and understanding. And then the third one is being able to take everything away and go, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, and let's solve it together. you may have had an issue, I may have had an issue, but let's put that to the side and go, how do we fix the environment every day? And then kind of coming together to go, what's the problem in the future that we need to get after? And then from an industry standpoint and partnership, don't steal Gabe, Solomon.
General Skinner, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can read more about all the projects General Skinner talked about, including Thunderdome, at fedgovtoday.com. Coming next, 4 is better than 1 for the Defense Department's cloud journey. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. The Defense Department says the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability contract will offer DoD users 9 capabilities through 4 cloud vendors. That's teeing up multi-cloud environments for users across the department. Armon Dadgar is co-founder and chief technology officer of HashiCorp. At TechNet Cyber this week, I asked him what that means for those users and the warfighters that depend on them.
It's both an opportunity and a challenge is the way I would think about it, right? I think the opportunity is how do we give access to these practitioners to the best of breed technology, right? And each of these cloud vendors, right, they make enormous investments and have differentiated capability. So that's the opportunity, is we want to enable that for the practitioners. The challenge, of course, becomes the complexity that this multi-cloud environment can bring if not managed correctly, right? So the way we really think about it is, how can we provide a consistent way for the practitioners to, whether it's consume it infrastructure on Amazon or Azure or Google or Oracle, we want to have consistency there, because otherwise what could happen is if we fragment that and have 5 different ways of doing it in 5 different environments, what will end up happening is we create a bunch of drag, and now the practitioners are actually stuck trying to deal with 5 different ways of managing these environments and not really focusing on whatever their mission is. So I think it's, I think it is both that opportunity and challenge that we face.
It's interesting you say that, because that was the argument originally for making it a single award contract, is they didn't want that complexity. Now they have it. What are the steps that you expect to see the Pentagon take to try to minimize at least that complexity?
I think what we've been talking to a lot of agencies is they're still in that discovery phase of figuring out strategically how should they approach this problem. What we've seen sort of time and time again, certainly working both across public sector and commercial sector, is that you have to be very clear coming in about laying a foundational approach to multi-cloud, rather than, I'll call it, sort of stepping into it backward. Because if you step into it backward, what you're going to create is just a bunch of chaos, right? You're going to have 5 different ways of doing it across all of these environments. Everything will be inconsistent. You'll have a bunch of challenges around security and compliance and enablement of your, your end application teams. Versus if you can be intentional around where do we put the right abstraction layers in and create those layers of consistency. We often talk about this as the notion of a cloud operating model, right? Because I don't think it's dissimilar to what's happening in the commercial space, where as these organizations adopt a multi-cloud environment, you have to be intentional about putting that foundation in. And I think now all the agencies and certainly DoD is looking at, how do we do the same thing?
I know DoD would be Fortune 1 if it was a company, but are there lessons to learn from a Fortune 10, Fortune 50 company in the multi-cloud sphere that could apply in an operation like DoD or another federal agency?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what we've seen the pattern over and over is often organizations will go in, and even agencies will do this in kind of a phase 1 of cloud, where I'll call it sort of an ad hoc approach. They sort of randomly adopt different technology, randomly adopt different processes to get, out to the cloud estates. And then they quickly realize they've created a mess. And so then there's this sort of phase 2 that often happens where they say, okay, I'm going to actually create a central platform team or a center of excellence. That center of excellence will describe and define a common blueprint for how to operate across these environments. And now we have this common landing zone or foundation across these environments that gives us a consistent way to do it at scale. I think that phase 1 to phase 2 is a lesson I'll call it hard learned. A lot of organizations they kind of get it wrong for the first 18, 24, 36 months, and then they invest in that sort of phase two. I think that, ideally if we could learn from others, it would be, hey, start with the phase two approach, really think about creating that CCOE or creating that platform strategy up front, rather than creating a mess and trying to clean it up later.
Yeah, so that was what I was even thinking, maybe toward a phase three, where you just stand up the result of what that COE is. Is that something that would make sense?
Exactly, yeah, and I think that phase three, to your point, becomes how do we take the pattern we maybe designed on one or two clouds and replicate it to all of them, as well as even back to our traditional data centers, right? Because I think we'd almost be remiss to ignore, yeah, the DoD is moving with JWCC into cloud, but there's an enormous footprint that is not cloud. And so how do we bring some of those same operating principles and some of that same developer-focused efficiency back to that environment as well?
One of the ongoing themes at this show is security, cybersecurity, and I wonder what that means for a multi-cloud environment like the Pentagon's building.
So, I'm actually really excited about some of the new mandates and things like the NIST standards that have been put out, because I think doing it right actually means baking zero trust in from the beginning. So certainly from a HashiCorp perspective, even before we called it zero trust, going back to sort of 2015, 2014, I think this notion of identity-based security and moving away from trusting our networks is absolutely critical to doing cloud in a secure way, right? So, now I think there's been a great job branding it Zero Trust. NIST has put out some great documentation and guidance around it, but I think that has to be a foundational approach, because where we've seen people fail is when you try and, in some sense, build it and then bolt security on later. It just doesn't work. You have to bake it into the foundation.
It's great to talk to you. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for hosting.
You can read more about the cloud journey ahead for the Defense Department at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, a big investment in zero trust coming at the Air Force. FedGov Today will be right back. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. The Air Force will follow the zero trust strategy that General Skinner of DISA mentioned earlier in the program. That strategy is supposed to be fully operational by 2027. Wanda Jones-Heath is Principal Cyber Advisor of the Air Force at TechNet Cyber. I asked her about the factors that drive the evolution of the threat landscape.
As I always say, the adversary gets a vote, and their vote is loud and clear.
Yeah.
We continue to see the capabilities, and so our job is to make sure that we're able to defend those. That we detect them early, figure out what they're doing, and then be able to respond in a timely manner.
How has what they're doing changed? What are you seeing inside the Air Force as far as the ways they're trying to get into the network, what they're trying to do if they're able to get in? The presumption now, of course, is that they're there and you have to be ready to defend against them.
Absolutely. We recognize they're there, right? The fallacy is if someone says they're not, that's definitely not true. They are aggressive. They are moving. They are attacking things that we know are challenges. Cyber hygiene is something I preach all the time. And if we don't do the basics, then we've given the adversary the key to move laterally, to take data, to cause disruption, to challenge the things that we hold near and dear. And so we need to just make sure that we are continually looking and continually improving innovation, new tools, things that we can say, hey, we need to stay focused just like they are.
The CIO of the Air Force, Lauren Knausenberger, was on the FedGov Today podcast a couple of weeks ago. We talked about zero trust. Huge topic of conversation at this event. Wanda, what are you seeing in zero trust, and how is the Air Force working to coordinate with DoD CIO on the zero trust strategy that's just out?
I can tell you that the DAF is all in, right? It's a journey. It's not you fix one thing and voila, we are zero trust compliant.
Right.
You know, it starts with your architecture and knowing how and the things that we need to change, and then focus on our identity. You know, identity is the key to being successful with zero trust. You know, we need to assume that, you know, that adversary is there. You know, continually say you have access and you continue that access. And so we are following what DoD is mandating. By 2027, we have investments. Secretary Kendall has put the money on the table for us to be able to do that. We have a full team with a strategy and concept, and so we're moving out.
Secretary Kendall was on this program last week talking about cyber as one of the important elements. Strikes me that's a sea change from what we would have seen 5-10 years ago, where the secretary of a service is talking about cyber as one of the important mission delivery areas rather than something that was stuck back in the IT shop.
Absolutely. You know, Honorable Kendall is a huge advocate, right? So in my position as the principal cyber advisor, that makes my job a little easier because we have that maximum support at the very top of the pyramid. And what I would say is, you know, as his advisor, my analysis, my recommendation, he listens. He gives me the authority to kind of, you know, have those conversations within the cyber portfolio, bringing those stakeholders together, and, you know, being able to talk to him about what we need to invest in and why. Cyber, when you talk about cybersecurity, our infrastructure is the foundation of helping us win against the adversary.
What is the portfolio of a principal cyber advisor? What all do you have jurisdiction or advisory authority over to talk to the secretary about?
So, you know, as his advisor, you know, the unfiltered analysis, the third-party assessments, and being able to provide that recommendation. You know, as you know, this position is mandated, you know, by Congress, and so there are areas that we must address. One being workforce readiness, whether it's the readiness of the cyber force, whether it's the readiness of the forces we present cybercom, acquisition of cyber capabilities, acquisition of cyber tools, the culture, you know, of the department as it relates to cybersecurity, you know, working with our DIB partners for supply chain risk management and cybersecurity, and cybersecurity at large. The biggest one that I spend a lot of time is the cyber posture. Understanding the cyber posture of our weapon systems, our information technology, and operational technology.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you said listed the weapon systems first when you're talking about cyber posture. Of course, that's the business that a military service is in, but I think a lot of people assume when they think cyber, they think technology stuff and operational stuff right away, not necessarily the weapon systems too, but there's software and everything now.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, we do a great job with our IT. We've invested in it. We're familiar with it. But when we come to our weapon systems and our operational technology, you know, we're moving in that direction. We're spending more time investing and getting the right people with the right skills in those areas.
Another thing that I think is interesting about the way you just described that portfolio is I think you said the word acquisition a number of times, and I don't know that people would think that that's what a PCA has her hand in also, in addition to the technology stuff.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the warfighter is the customer, right? And so we need to make sure they have the tools to be able to, you know, do the things that we ask them to do, as well as some of the capabilities. And then lastly, you know, one of the biggest roles also is certifying the adequacy of the cyber budget, right? And ensuring that we're investing in the right things at the right time.
I want to go back to the threat landscape where we started, Wanda. As you look at the trajectory of the last couple of years, is that instructive in thinking about where it will go, or does it change in such a dynamic way that you really just can't predict it? You have to try to be aware of what's going on and keep pace.
So it's a little bit of both, you know, because we depend on intelligence to tell us, you know, what's going on, right? And being able to understand the targeting, that the adversary, the type of assets they're going after. So what we're hearing on the black web, you know, all of that is relevant to understand what the adversary is and targeting and what they're saying, you know, and we try to make sure that, you know, we keep that as part of the discussion. You know, it changes. You know, one day they may be targeting our weapon systems. The next day they may be targeting our operational technology. So all of that has to be protected at all times.
You just came from a panel with all of the principal cyber advisors of all of the services. What's that collaboration look like when you're not at a conference like this and you're working with your peers in the Pentagon?
I mean, it's crucial, right? Because I can't do it all. They can't do it all. So the more we're able to collaborate and partner and build on their strengths, for example, the Navy, you know, as they move out on a lot of the operational technology, they're leading the effort. You know, we're leading in software development, you know, so there are things that we depend upon each other. We share, we email each other. We spend a lot of time talking and making sure that we are working together as much as possible.
Final thought, that collaboration, how would you like to see that mature over time? How would you like to see that evolve and develop?
I mean, I think we're doing a great job. You know, we all recognize that we bring different skills to the table. We look at our staffs are connecting more and more. So if I had to say anything, just making sure our staffs, you know, have that connectivity and relationship and partnership like we do.
Wanda, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Francis.
You can read more about the Air Force's cyber posture and more about cyber across the federal government at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today with Francis Rose is back in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. In this week's event spotlight, ACT-IAC will present the Health Innovation Summit June 8th in Reston. Speakers include the Chief Information Officer at HHS, Carl Mathias, Dr. Carolyn Clancy of the Department of Veterans Affairs, and many more leaders from across the government health IT community. You can read more about the event, find a link to register at fedgovtoday.com/events. Finally, FedGov Today is on the road again this week. Next Sunday morning at 10:30, coverage from Special Operations Forces Week in Tampa. The guests will include the Chief Technology Officer for Central Command, Skylar Moore. Hope you'll join me then. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for watching. Have a great week. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today.